you've spent any time shopping for a TV this year, you've probably landed on the same two names over and over again. Hisense and TCL have basically taken over the mid-range and even the flagship TV market in 2026, pushing out specs that used to belong to $2,500 sets for under $1,000. But here's the problem nobody talks about. These two brands are now so close in price and marketing that picking the wrong one can mean living with a TV that fights you every single day. Whether that's washed-out blacks during a movie night or a screen that looks dim the second the sun hits your living room. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which brand wins for your specific room, your specific use case, and your specific budget. And there's actually a twist in this rivalry that most buying guides won't tell you. Drop a comment and let me know which brand you're currently leaning toward, because I guarantee some of you are about to change your mind. Who are these two companies anyways? Hisense has been around since 1969, but it's really only in the last few years that it's become a serious threat to Samsung and Sony. Its whole strategy is simple. Pack in as much brightness and as many features as possible, then price it low enough that people can't say no. Hisense also owns the Toshiba TV brand globally, which tells you how much shelf space this company is chasing. TCL, on the other hand, started in 1981 and has quietly become one of the largest TV manufacturers in the entire world by volume. Its strategy is a little different. Instead of just chasing brightness numbers, TCL leans on dimming zone density, meaning it crams in more individually controlled backlight zones for tighter contrast control. Neither company sells OLED TVs in North America in 2026. Both are all in on Mini-LED as their premium technology, which is exactly why this comparison actually matters. You're not choosing between two totally different technologies. You're choosing between two very different approaches to the same technology. The 2026 lineups you'll actually see in stores. Before we get into who wins what, you need to understand how these lineups are structured, because the naming alone trips up a lot of buyers. On the Hisense side, you've got the UR9 and UR8 at the top, using RGB Mini-LED for the best color and brightness performance the brand offers. Below that sits the U8QGN, which is the traditional Mini-LED flagship most people actually buy, followed by the U7SG as the mid-range sweet spot, and then the U6 series and A series covering entry-level and budget options. TCL mirrors this with the QM8K and QM7K at the top as its Halo Mini-LED models, the Q7 and Q6 as mid-tier QLEDs, and the Q5 as the true entry point. One thing worth knowing right away, TCL's Q5 and some Q6 models still ship with Roku TV, especially at Walmart, while the higher-end QM7 and QM8 default to Google TV. Hisense, meanwhile, has mostly unified around Google TV in the US, with only some U6 models using Fire TV instead. Keep that platform detail in mind because it's going to matter more than you'd expect later in this video. Brightness, where Hisense actually wins. Let's start with the category that gets the most attention in marketing: peak brightness. The Hisense U8QGN is hitting somewhere around 5,000 nits in HDR peak brightness based on lab and marketing figures, and even accounting for real-world variants, that's an enormous number. TCL's QM8K comes in strong too at over 4,000 nits, but it's typically a step behind Hisense's brightest models when you put them side by side in a real HDR highlight test. So what does that actually mean for you? If your living room has big windows or you tend to watch TV during the day with natural light pouring in, that extra brightness on the Hisense side isn't just a spec sheet number. It's the difference between HDR highlights that punch through the glare and highlights that look flat and washed out because the panel simply can't overpower the ambient light. If you're the kind of person who watches football on a Sunday afternoon with the blinds half open, this is a real tangible advantage for Hisense. So right now, on brightness alone, Hisense is ahead, but brightness isn't the whole story, and this is where TCL comes back swinging. Contrast and black levels, where TCL fights back. But brightness isn't the whole story, and this is where TCL makes its case. TCL's QM8K in particular has a higher dimming zone density than comparable Hisense models at the same screen size, which means it can control its backlight in smaller, more precise sections. In practical terms, that translates to tighter local dimming, less blooming, that's the glow you see around bright objects on a dark background, and noticeably better performance during dark scenes, like a night sky full of stars or a moody thriller lit mostly by candlelight. Hisense's U8QGN and UR8 also have very high zone counts, but real-world blooming control can vary more depending on the specific size you buy, and some of the larger Hisense models actually switch to ADS or IPS-style panels, which widen the viewing angle but sacrifice contrast to do it. So here's your first checkpoint. If you're mostly a daytime viewer or someone who watches with the lights on, Hisense's brightness advantage is going to serve you better day to day. But if you're building anything close to a dedicated home theater setup, or you do most of your watching at night with the lights off, TCL's tighter dimming control is going to give you a more polished, less distracting picture. Brightness versus darkroom contrast, that's the first real split between these two brands, and it's not settled yet because color is about to shift the conversation again.
Color accuracy, a closer match than you'd think. Once you get into the Q6 and U6 tiers and above, both brands use quantum dot layers that cover most of the DCI P3 color gamut, which is the range that most HDR content is mastered in. After calibration, the U8N and UR8 from Hisense are genuinely close to the QM7 and QM8 from TCL in terms of color accuracy for casual viewing. Hisense's newer RGB Mini-LED technology on the UR8 and UR9 is designed to push color volume even further, but the real-world benefit depends heavily on the content you're watching and whether the TV has been properly calibrated out of the box. Neither brand is going to match the reference level accuracy you'd get from a high-end Sony or LG OLED, but for the price, both are impressively close to each other here, so color isn't really going to be your deciding factor unless you're chasing that last 5% of accuracy as a video file. Call color a draw then, which means the scoreboard is still wide open, and the next category matters a lot if sports are part of your routine. Motion handling, why sports fans should pay attention. If you watch a lot of live sports, this next category deserves your full attention. Hisense's U7 and U8 series tend to hold up better during fast motion, think hockey pucks, soccer balls, or a quick camera pan across a stadium, compared to TCL's mid-range Q6 and Q7 models. That gap closes significantly at the top of TCL's lineup, where the QM7 and QM8 use newer processors that noticeably improve motion clarity. Both brands also support high refresh panels, either 144 or 165 Hz natively, which helps smooth things out further in game mode or with motion interpolation turned on. So if sports are the main reason you're upgrading your TV and you're shopping in the mid-range, Hisense currently has a slight edge. But if you're willing to spend up to TCL's flagship tier, that advantage mostly disappears. Interestingly, Hisense is holding a narrow lead through picture quality so far, but gaming is where things could tighten up completely. Gaming performance, a near-dead heat. For gamers, 2026 has genuinely been a great year because both brands now treat gaming as a core feature rather than an afterthought. Hisense's U7QG supports up to 165 Hz at 4K with 3 or more HDMI 2.1 ports, while TCL's QM8K tops out at 144 Hz, but can offer anywhere from 2 to 4 HDMI 2.1 ports depending on the specific model and size you choose. Both support VRR and ALM, and input lag on both brands sits in that low sub-10 millisecond range at 4K and 120 frames per second, which is genuinely excellent for a non-OLED TV. If you're playing on a PS5 or Xbox Series X, either brand will handle 4K at 120 frames per second with VRR without any real complaints. PC gamers get a small edge with Hisense's 165 Hz ceiling on the U8QG, but TCL's QM8K counters with its emphasis on strong VRR performance, and in some configurations, more HDMI 2.1 ports overall. Realistically, this category is a tie for the vast majority of console gamers, and your decision here should come down to the specific model, the port count you actually need, and whatever deal you can find rather than a fundamental gap between the brands. So gaming doesn't break the tie either, which means the deciding factor for a lot of buyers isn't going to be the panel at all. It's going to be something most people don't even think to check. Smart platforms, the decision most people overlook. Here's something that rarely gets the attention it deserves in TV comparisons, but it genuinely shapes how much you'll enjoy the TV every single day: the software running on top of the hardware. TCL is currently the only one of these two brands still offering Roku TV in the US, mainly on the Q5 and some Q6 trims sold through Walmart. If you've used Roku before, you know the appeal. Light laugh. It's fast, the grid-style interface is simple, there are fewer ads cluttering your home screen, and setup takes almost no time. The trade-off is that it doesn't do as much cross-service content discovery as Google TV does. Speaking of which, TCL's QM7 and QM8 default to Google TV, and Hisense has gone all in on Google TV across its entire US lineup, from the U6 all the way to the U9. Google TV gives you cross-service search, content recommendations pulled from multiple apps at once, and integration with Google Assistant and Gemini AI features, but it does come with a heavier ad presence on the home screen. So here's a genuinely useful checkpoint. If you specifically want the simplicity of Roku TV, TCL is your only option between these two brands, full stop. But if you want one consistent smart TV experience, whether you're buying a 55-inch bedroom TV or an 85-inch living room flagship, Hisense's commitment to Google TV across its whole lineup in the US makes that a lot more predictable. That one's really about personal preference rather than a clear winner. So let's move to something everyone glosses over until they're already sitting on the couch: how these TVs actually sound.
Sound quality? Don't expect miracles from either. Neither of these brands is going to replace a proper soundbar, and honestly, nobody buying a TV in this price range should expect that. TCL's QM7 and QM8 typically use a 2.1 channel setup with Dolby Atmos decoding, and the tuning leans toward cleaner dialogue with fairly restrained bass. Hisense's U7, U8, and UR8 models often step up to a 2.1.2 channel configuration on select sizes, adding up-firing drivers for a bit of height effect, and the overall sound tends to be louder with more aggressive bass. If audio quality is a priority for you, the honest answer is that a $200 to $400 soundbar with eARC support is going to be a bigger upgrade than choosing one of these brands over the other, so don't let built-in speaker performance be the deciding factor in this comparison. Slight edge to Hisense for a punchier out-of-the-box sound, but honestly, neither should be your reason to choose. The real deciding factor for most people is coming up next. Now let's talk money, because this is where the rivalry gets interesting. At the 55-inch entry level, TCL's Q5 typically runs $329 to $429, while Hisense's U6 sits at $349 to $449, close enough that it's basically a wash. At 65 inches in the mid-tier, the Q6 and U6 are nearly identical, both landing in the $429 to $549 range, and both offer Mini-LED at this size now, which would have been unheard of a few years ago. Things start to separate at the mid-high tier, where TCL's Q7 runs $599 to $749 against Hisense's U7 at $649 to $799. Hisense costs a bit more, but it's also brighter. Move up to the high tier, and TCL's QM7 sits at $799 to $999, while Hisense's U8 runs $899 to $1,099, with TCL offering more dimming zones per dollar and Hisense offering more raw brightness. At the flagship 75 to 85-inch sizes, TCL's QM8 runs $1,499 to $1,899, compared to Hisense's U9 at $1,599 to $1,999. And again, Hisense tends to be brighter at these larger sizes. The pattern across almost every tier is consistent. TCL is slightly cheaper at a given performance level, while Hisense charges a modest premium in exchange for extra brightness. Hisense also tends to go on deeper, more frequent sales, particularly at Best Buy and Costco, so if you're patient and willing to wait for a discount, that price gap can shrink or disappear entirely. On pure value, TCL is currently ahead, but a lower price only matters if the TV actually holds up, so that's exactly what we need to check next. Reliability and long-term ownership. Both brands offer a standard 1-year limited warranty on parts and panels, which is fairly typical for mainstream TV manufacturers and noticeably shorter than what you'd get from a premium brand. In terms of out-of-box reliability, the two brands are roughly comparable, sitting in that solid but not flawless mainstream tier, below what you'd expect from Sony or LG's OLED lineups. Seriously, the most commonly reported issues on both sides involve panel uniformity problems, like dirty screen effect or uneven edge brightness, occasional HDMI port faults, and firmware bugs, though it's worth noting that firmware issues have historically been reported more often on Hisense sets, even though the situation has improved heading into 2026. Reassuringly, for long-term ownership, both brands' Mini-LED backlights should comfortably outlast a typical 5 to 7 year ownership window before you'd notice meaningful brightness loss. And when something does eventually fail, it's far more likely to be a mainboard or HDMI board issue than the backlight itself. On the retail side, TCL has a wider footprint, showing up at Walmart, Best Buy, Amazon, Costco, and Sam's Club, while Hisense is strongest at Best Buy and Costco, but has a much smaller presence at Walmart for its higher-end U7, U8, and U9 models. Importantly, if you're buying from Costco specifically, both brands benefit from that retailer's 90-day return window, which gives you a genuinely useful safety net if you happen to get a unit with panel uniformity issues, something worth taking advantage of regardless of which brand you choose. Reliability itself is close to a wash, so with every category now on the table, it's time to put names to all of this and land on actual models.
The models worth actually shortlisting. If you're narrowing things down to specific models, here's where the research points. On the Hisense side, the U8QG at 65 inches is the standout. Mini-LED QLED, around 5,000 nits of peak brightness, 165 Hz, 3 or more HDMI 2.1 ports, and Google TV, making it the pick for bright rooms, punchy HDR, and high-refresh gaming. Think of it as the set you'd put in a living room with big south-facing windows, where a dimmer TV would just get washed out by mid-afternoon sun. This is the one that keeps HDR highlights looking like HDR highlights instead of a slightly brighter version of SDR. The UR8SG and UR9SG sit above it with RGB Mini-LED technology and the best measured color and brightness performance in the lineup. And if you're the kind of buyer who actually notices subtle color grading in a film or wants the most accurate skin tones on a nature documentary, this is where that extra investment starts to show up on screen. That said, you'll pay a real premium for it, and you may see slightly more uniformity variance unit to unit, which is worth keeping in mind. This is the tier where it genuinely pays to buy from a retailer with a generous return window, just in case the specific unit you get isn't perfectly even edge to edge. For most people, though, the U7SG is the mid-range sweet spot most people should actually consider, offering strong brightness and 165 Hz at a much more reasonable price. And it's the model I'd point a typical family toward if they want most of the U8QG experience without paying flagship money. On the TCL side, the QM8K at 65 inches is the direct rival to the U8QG, offering Mini-LED QLED performance with over 4,000 nits, thousands of dimming zones at larger sizes, 144 Hz, and Google TV, making it the go-to for darkroom movie watching and gamers who prioritize tight dimming control over raw brightness. If your idea of a good night is closing the curtains, killing the lights, and watching something moody and cinematic, this is the set that's going to reward you for it, because that dimming zone density is exactly what keeps shadows looking like shadows instead of a hazy gray blur. The QM7K sits just below it with slightly fewer zones and less brightness, but still very strong overall Mini-LED performance, typically priced between the Q7 and the QM8K. And it's a smart pick if you want most of the QM8K's darkroom advantage without stretching all the way to flagship pricing. A genuinely underrated middle option that a lot of buyers skip past without realizing how close it actually gets. If your budget is tighter, the Q7 and Q6 from TCL offer solid 4K gaming and respectable HDR without reaching the brightness or dimming density of the QM series, and they're a sensible landing spot if you just want a clean, capable 4K TV without chasing flagship tier numbers you may not even fully use. The Q5 remains a genuinely good entry-level pick, particularly if you want the simplicity of Roku TV. And for a lot of casual viewers, someone who mostly watches cable, streams a few few shows and doesn't need the brightest or most feature-packed set in the room, that simplicity alone can matter more than another few hundred nits of peak brightness ever will. So after going through picture quality, brightness, contrast, motion, gaming, smart platforms, sound, pricing, and reliability, here's how this actually breaks down for real buyers. If you've got a bright living room, watch a lot of daytime television or live sports, and want a TV that can fight through glare and still deliver punchy HDR highlights, the Hisense U7SG or U8QG is your better choice. And the U8QG in particular is genuinely one of the brightest LCD TVs you can buy at its price point in 2026. If you're building a dark home theater setup or you primarily watch movies at night with the lights off, TCL's QM7K or QM8K is going to give you a more controlled, less distracting picture thanks to that higher dimming zone density, and it currently holds a measurable advantage in contrast control over most Hisense models at the same size. If you're a hardcore gamer, this one's genuinely close. Go with the U8QG if you specifically want that 165Hz ceiling and maximum brightness, or go with the QM8K if tight local dimming and strong VRR performance matter more to you than a slightly higher refresh rate. If your budget is under $500 for a 55 to 65-inch set, both the TCL Q5 or Q6 and the U6 are strong value picks, so let whichever one is currently on sale make the decision for you. And if platform matters to you specifically, remember that TCL is your only option if you want Roku TV, while Hisense gives you a more consistent Google TV experience whether you're buying a small bedroom TV or an 85-inch flagship. The honest truth is that neither brand universally crushes the other in 2026. What actually happens is that at specific price points and in specific rooms, one model can absolutely dominate its direct rival, whether that's the U8QG lighting up a sun-filled living room or the QM8K delivering deep, controlled blacks in a dark theater room. Now that you know exactly where each brand wins and where it falls short, I want to hear from you. Which one matches your room and your viewing habits better? And have you already made the jump to one of these brands? Drop your pick in the comments. And if this breakdown actually helped you make sense of the 2026 TV market, you know what to do.